Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out today. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll give you an update on what's been happening with Open Orphan over the last effectively 5 months. It's under 5 months, in fact, since we went public in June of this year through a reverse takeover of Venn. So, as I said, we're 5 months public through a reverse takeover of Venn. We want to be the leading European rare disease orphan product company, and we're a pharma services company. So we're not developing our own products. We're working on behalf of pharma companies who get us to do a lot of things. For example, consulting, preclinical design, consulting on trial design, clinical trials, and then reimbursement and regulatory approval. So we service, and so that's really important because we're not in the business of having a binary risk associated with the business as pharmaceutical companies have, for example. So if they're developing a drug, the drug doesn't meet its endpoints, there's a huge risk and share price collapses. The company effectively can often go bust. So in our case, despite the result, we are guaranteed the income associated with the business. So it is a pharma services company. We're also in the rare disease space, and sometimes people think rare is small, a small market, but in fact it's a huge market. 300 million people worldwide suffer from rare disease. 30 million people in Europe have rare diseases. And of all those rare diseases, only 10% of them have an FDA or EMA or Japanese approval product on the market. So there's a huge market. It's untapped or unmet because of that 90% of those diseases that are not treated. And it's growing at twice the rate of every other sector in the pharma market. So last year, for example, 58% of all the products approved by the FDA were orphan products. So it's a growth market. It's a huge market, and it's growing. It's a growth market. So these are the characteristics as to why we're in this business, and really excited to tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing over the last 5 months. Usual disclaimer applies. A little bit about the company. So we went public in June of this year through a reverse takeover of Venn. ORPH is a ticker. Market cap as of today about 16 million. We're a little bit higher on the share price from when this presentation was developed. We raised 4.5 million in equity at that point in time from institutional investors, mainly in the UK, some in Ireland. And again, there's parallels between this company and the last company in that we operate headquartered here in the UK, in London, a lot of the business in Dublin as well, Paris and Breda, so in Amsterdam. So it is kind of a European footprint. When we acquired Venn, it had 14.5 million in revenues, yet it was, and I'll tell you a little bit in the next slides, loss-making, badly run. And actually, we acquired it for a good price. We acquired it for 4 million, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. The strategy going forward is correct Venn, right-size it, make it a little bit fit for purpose, and ensure that it has all the expertise associated with being a consulting house in the high-end market of reimbursement and regulatory approval. So that's what we're doing in terms of Venn. But also the bolt-on acquisition strategy was critical as part of the future activities of the company. So we are acquiring several consulting houses across Europe that will really add to the revenue. So the current revenues of 14.5 million from last year, we're guiding similar revenues this year for Venn and Open Orphan. But as part of the acquisition strategy, we hope to have a significant announcement before the end of this year that will be transformational in the context of the revenue. We are also, and I'll talk a little bit about those, also on the slide, developing a genomic health database, and this is because there's such an untapped need in the rare disease space. We really want to ignite the research activities within pharma companies by really developing this tool, this research tool that will really help them identify the genetic basis of those rare diseases that are not treated, and as a result of accessing our database, we will get access fees, significant milestone payments as they bring those products through development, and then royalties on the sales of those products. So it is slightly different from just a services. It's a service with an added kick because of the ongoing feedback from the pharma companies and our customers. I'll also talk a little bit about Venn and the different companies that we work with. A lot of them are pharma leading companies and in the orphan space. And we're so confident that this market is good for us, good for you as investors, dividend in 2 years, and we have a very clearly defined exit strategy. The leadership team, this business is all about relationships, as you all know. And so everyone in the management team, Cathal Friol, Brendan Buckley and myself, we've been in the pharma services business or the finance area all our careers. Just to go into Cathal first, he's a stockbroker by trade, has founded 3 different companies. You might know some of them. Fastnet was one of them, and again, on AIM, a public company, raised 50 million. Amrit Pharmaceuticals, another one that he's also a co-founder of. Amrit about to be listed on NASDAQ at about 300 million investment or valuation, excuse me. And finally, Open Orphan. So he's used to raising money on public with public companies and has been very successful on that. Brendan Buckley, clinician by training, had a company acquired by Icon. Icon is a clinical research organization valued at 8 billion. Currently, and he was the chief medical officer there for 5 years in the 2000s. Again, huge expertise in M&A as a result of what he did with Icon in really bolt-on acquisition strategy there, understands clinical trials, and really is a tour de force in the orphan space in Europe because he helped really develop the protocols that are really the basis of the orphan drug legislation in Europe now. Before I go on, one thing I didn't say is that some of you might have asked what are orphan products, and just to be absolutely clear on that, orphan products, it's just a very simple designation that's given to products that are used to treat rare disease. And the definition of rare is it affects 1 in 2,000 people or less. So it's a designation, but the designation is important because why is it the fastest growing segment of the market? And these are some of the reasons why I believe, or we believe it is. A lot of legislation was put in place in the US and Europe to really incentivize pharma companies to really get into this orphan drug space and rare disease space. So as a result, there's 2,500 products in development. They're not on the market yet. And again, this is our pipeline that we can tap into. The clinical trials you have to do associated with the development clinical evaluation of these products is they're smaller, and you typically only have to do 2 phases, phase 1 and 2, and then you go for regulatory approval. Large untapped market, as I said, 30 million people in Europe, and a huge consulting business that's grown up around that, and we're part of that. The other thing I should say is that in the US, there's over 500 orphan products on the market approved. In Europe, there's only 120. So that disparity is really our opportunity where we are bringing those products on behalf of those companies to Europe and really putting them into the major markets in Europe. So a huge amount of business in the context of existing products on the market in the US, and then also the development of new products that are coming through the pipeline. And on top of that, we'll also ignite other research projects through our Genomic Health database platform. So there's some of the incentives to really get us into this market. We understand the market. And this is the business strategy. So we acquired Venn and part of the Open Orphan services, and I'll tell you a little bit about Venn in the next slide. We also have the 2 digital platforms that we're going to roll out over the next year, Q1 for the Genomic Health database, and the end of the year 2020 for virtual rep. So Venn. It's a funny story, but it's a nice little company, 14.5 million revenues, but it was undercapitalized, underutilized in terms of staff utilization, loss-making. But despite all that, it had a fantastic list of customers, pharma companies, global companies, about 100 different companies which it's worked with. So the opportunity we saw was, let's acquire Venn at a knockdown price, which we did. We raised money, we recapitalized. 80% of the business is repeat business, so they did a good job with these companies, just badly managed. Strong customer base, as I said, and strong in the orphan space. So again, we wanted to focus on that space. So the goal is to recapitalize, which we're doing, and we put in 4.5 million already, as I said. Restructure, we're right-sizing Venn. We're correcting all the deficits associated with the Venn operation that made it loss-making up to now. And we've guided the market that we will be profitable by H2 next year. profit making re-rate based on additional substantial revenues, part of the bolt-on acquisition strategy, and then launch additional services through the digital platforms. So they're what we're actively going on with, and I think you might have seen over the last few months a lot of news flow in that regard. Obviously, we have Ipsen, which is a major company now as a preferred partner with Venn, Open Orphan, and that's really significant because that guarantees existing revenues, but then also future revenues going forward. We want to have this type of preferred partner relationship with every customer we have. Also with Karna Biosciences, another company we've just announced, that we did consulting with them in part of their clinical trials. We're now doing the clinical trials with them. So that service expansion with Karna is also something we want to do with all the companies. This slide goes to every activity that the Venn covers, and it really covers the whole late discovery, preclinical, phase 1, 2, and 3, and marketing. So we cover the whole gamut of activities that pharma companies typically outsource. They don't do this themselves. They're good at finding the molecules, they're good at sales and marketing, but the in-between stuff, they always outsource. That's the business we're in. And just in terms of the track record of Venn, this really shows what it's been doing. So over the last 10 years, actually, fundamentally, because they acquired 2 companies, but there's about 130 programs that they've initiated in the last 5 years. And again, across all the areas you see there, oncology, cardiology, neurology, virology, all the major segments of the pharma market. And across all the different types of molecules, be it small molecules, be it biologics, gene therapy. So again, the expertise within the company is evolving with time, and as the type of products coming through the pharma segment is changing. So I guess this comes back to the initial strategy, and then I'll end on Venn. It is like really what we're doing is the Pharma Services company in Europe is serviced by 2 types of companies, be it the IQVIA, the Parexel, the McKinseys, the big ones. The other half is serviced by smaller companies like ourselves. We are acquiring some of those to really build on the revenue and hope to double that by the end of the year. And so it is that bolt-on acquisition strategy that we will get as a result of that rapid revenue growth. And we've said 50 million by 2022 in 2 years from IPO. And as a result of that, be re-rated as other companies in the space, in the sector, with that type of valuation, with that type of revenue. So that's the Venn Crow consulting part of the business. Now I'm going to change tack a little bit just to talk a little bit about the Genomic Health database. And this is a database where we are corralling a huge amount of clinical and genomic information from rare disease patients. So really what we're aiming to be, and I'll tell you a little bit, value to become Europeans' broker of rare disease data, to be the largest rare disease database globally. The platform is in its final phases, and I say that we worked with Empiric Logic to finalize the database. We have the software pretty much built, and I think you probably saw the announcement on Monday that we now have 5 pharma companies working with us to really fine-tune, hone, and make fit for purpose the database. So we're really excited by that because these are the companies that will be using this data. So they're helping us to finesse it, make sure that the data we're collecting is what's appropriate for them. And it's quite interesting. While it's confidential, I can't announce them, and they don't even know who the others are. All the feedback we've got from them so far has been very positive in the context of we're on the right track. The database is pretty much ready to go. So it's been very kind of gratifying to be working with these companies. We're also working with the patient advocacy groups. So how do the patients find out about this database? And really through the patient advocacy groups, we really are going to they're going to be our marketeers associated with making the database aware, making the patients aware of it. Likewise, with the pharma companies, we're also bringing the advocacy groups on board as early adopters to really, again, finesse the database to make sure it's patient-friendly. And we hope to announce something like that in the next week or so. So it is a kind of a unique strategy. Of all the data we're talking about, it is out there. So we've done an analysis of how much genomic data exists with rare disease patients across Europe. And we're targeting for 10,000 in 2 years for this database. Each of those data sets is valued at 5,000 euros. So the nominal value of this database is 50 million, and that's assuming a linear take-up of the data from one pharma company, or from, over certain disease areas. This is a pre-competitive space, non-exclusive, so we imagine that multiple pharma companies will be looking at the same data at the same time. So the true value of this database is probably multiples of 50 million. So Q1 of 2020 is the rollout date once we finish the early adoption beta adapter phase that we're going through right now. So again, this will lead into those pharma companies who are working through the Venn activities, the consulting clinical trials, who have products on the market, who will look to this database to identify new research targets that can be their new pipeline of products coming through development. Finally, I'll just talk quickly about this. So this is a virtual rep, the second digital database, and this is really focused on, as we bring those products to Europe that were not here before, this is a digital engagement platform whereby the companies that we're doing that work on behalf of those, they can use this to really tap into the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the physicians who are prescribing these drugs across Europe. And really, it's more it's a virtual kind of way in which a digital platform they can engage with these rather than having people driving around trying to promote their products. It also is slightly different from competing with a product because there's no comparator in the marketplace. These are all new products on the European market. Roll this out in the end of 2020. I want to just give you a sense of where the 5,000 valuation of the data set comes from, and that's based on precedent in the market. Some of the deals, you probably have heard some of them, of this is what companies can garner from investment, and then these are deals that companies can get from various activities and pharma companies who acquire the data. So the 5,000 data set comes from, these are complex disease. In rare disease, the valuation is about double what it would be for complex disease. So again, based on really good precedents in the market. So I've given you a lot of information. It's all there, but it all sits together really nicely. Excited about the news flow. Management team that's fit for purpose. It's a clear growth strategy, untapped, with a huge unmet need. It is the fastest growing segment of the market, as I said, and we are confident of this, that we will have dividends in 2 years, but a clearly defined exit strategy. And in the context of the bolt-on acquisition, we hope to have a major announcement before the end of this year. So thank you very much, and happy to take questions.
Just on the database you're looking to build, I presume that the patient data coming in will not necessarily be in the same format since it's coming from different sources. How are you going to be able to handle that, and how will you build something that's sort of value to your potential customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the data will be in the same format because it's coming directly from the patients. So the advocacy groups promote the database. The patients actually following their consent, so everything is with informed consent. Everything is also GDPR compliant. So again, because of the new data legislation across Europe, these patients own their data, so they can elect to share their data with us. So the patients actually share their data, and actually there's a huge amount of studies shown that patient-derived data compared to clinical data is equally valid or as good. So patient-derived data, and then they upload their genomic information. So they do that as they walk through our database. So the format for every patient is the same.
Okay, and then just the second one. I guess you'll need sort of a critical size, even we're talking orphan diseases, so fairly small numbers, but if you initially get sort of a smattering of patients spread across a number of different diseases, isn't that going to be lower value than if you had sort of a sufficient concentration in one area?
Yeah, it really does depend on the rare disease, but some rare diseases are so prevalent that you don't need a huge amount of samples to find a target. So in coming back to the model, is there a higher valuation on those smaller number of samples if the prevalence and the genetics determines that? So that is a really good question. Currently, we're pricing them all the same, and so as we roll out, that's the way it's going to be. 100 data sets is probably the minimum you need for the more rare diseases. So we're very confident we can get that. coming back to what I said about the amount of data that is in Europe, there's about 200,000 patients across Europe that have whole genome sequence, and these are rare disease patients that have whole genome sequence. I'm not counting people who have genotype data, which is a more shallow level of genetic data, but equally valuable, and that's estimated to be about 1 million people across Europe.
When the reverse takeover was announced, I thought that Venn will simply sort of disappear. Now, can you please explain, I mean, in what sense has it been transformed? What parts of it fit into the big, orphan company? Yeah. I'm not very clear about that.
Yeah. So Venn, and I tried to articulate that it was badly run, and so we're now right-sizing it. Staff utilization, for example, was 60%. It's now up to 90%. We're corralling premises so that it's only the amount of premises we need, and the staff numbers are being reduced. So we're honing it, we're cutting it down to size, but so it's fit for purpose. We kept the name Venn because it has a reputation, and that comes back to the pharma companies, the 100 companies, repeat customers that know Venn, like Venn. So we're maintaining that relationship, but running it in a way that's going to be profit making.
I mean, when the transformation is complete, do you expect the Venn label to go, or are you going to keep it?
Current strategy is to keep it. And again, coming back to the reputation it does have in terms of delivering good products back to, or good data back to customers. So we're keeping it for that reason. Okay. The management has changed, though. The management of Venn is completely different now.
Hi, thank you. It sounds very exciting. I have 2 questions. The first is, what impact, given you're so involved in Europe, is Brexit going to have in terms of the regulatory stuff? And secondly, can you explain a bit more about what you mean by your exit strategy post-scale-up?
Sure. So Brexit, other than because of the UK, there's a guarantee that the data protection legislation won't change within the next 2 years, so we do have time. I also look at the English current legislation, with the data protection legislation that was pretty much a deployment of the EU legislation. It's a very good legislation that is quite pragmatic. I honestly don't think it'll change much from what's currently there. So I don't see that as a huge target. But even if it was something that became draconian and took away the ownership of data from a patient, which I think is unlikely to happen, we'll have time to correct for that. The other thing is that most of the whole genome sequencing, there's some in the UK because of Genome England, and rare disease was a focus area of that. So there is some whole genome sequence there, but there's a lot outside the UK as well, across Europe. So I'm not too worried about Brexit currently. And then your second question was exit strategy. Yeah, apologies. So we're talking to lots of companies. So we believe as we get above the 50 million revenues, which we will achieve rapidly due to the bolt-on acquisition strategy, the likes of IQVIA, all the major consulting houses, Wuxi Aptech, all the companies out there who are in this space, who don't have a franchise model, who don't really have a footprint of that in Europe, we believe they would be the companies that might be interested in what we're doing, and they're also very interested in data. Thanks, Steve.